Welcome all the Sangam Talks viewers. Today we have joined for Luminaries of Bengal series presented by Sangam Talks and Bangla Abhar. This is episode 9. The title of today's episode is Political Revolution in Bengal from Khudiram ji to Netaji. Our speaker today is Professor Gautam Sen. Dr. Gautam Sen was director and lecturer in the Masters in Politics of the World Economy at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Sen has been an advisor to three prime ministers and was also senior consultant with the UNDP and UNIDU, as well as with Brunei Investment Corporation and Barclays Capital. He has lectured to NATO officers in Brussels and taught high-ranking officers at the Royal College of Defence Studies in London. Dr. Sen has published extensively, and his recent pieces are available on the First Post and the Sunday Guardian portals. He is co-author of Analyzing the Global Political Economy, Princeton University Press 2009, and is currently co-authoring a book for Simon Schuster Publishers on India's economic reforms. Welcome, Professor Gautam Sen, to today's talk.
Thank you.
Our moderator today is Mr. Animitra Chakrabarti. He is a journalist and a general secretary for Bengal Volunteers. He will be leading the session today. With this, Animitra ji, I'll hand over the session to you and request you to lead the session, please.
Thank you, Akshay Radhavji. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Good evening, Dr. Sen. Good evening out to all the viewers and the persons who are going to see or will see the session in some days from now. Now, today's topic is political revolution in Bengal from Khudiram to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In a nutshell, it can be stated: the Bengal has always been the land of contradictions. It has witnessed incessant persecutions down the ages, down the centuries, and also witnessed insurrections, political agitations, and even almost revolutions. I'm trying to say almost, since this revolution almost did happen, but how much did it happen? It shall be deciphered later. Now the question is, a political revolution can't occur on a single day. There's a need of a philosophy. There is need of gradual approaches to reach the first stage of it. So when we are going through the political revolution saga in Bengal, it can be found that from the 1860s, the Bengal school of thought had tried to redetermine and rediscover its identity, the Hindu identity. In 1867, the Hindu Mela that was pioneered by the Brahmo Samaj and other Hindu elites in Bengal is regarded as the first and foremost concept of Hindu nationalism in the Indian subcontinent. From the very beginning, Hindu Mela tried to determine the Hindu identity based on the ancient and the modern context. And it led to, for the first time, the growth of the physical culture in Bengal. Navagopal Mitra of Hindu Mela created a number of gymnasiums in the modern context, the modern gymnasiums, and also akhadas, even around Calcutta and also even in the other parts of the Bengal, say the eastern part of Bengal. So he was so much fascinated with the national that he founded National Gymnasium, National Newspaper, and so he was known as National Nabokopal in the Bengal circles. In the 1870s, when Amritabaja Patrika, it was being published in Bengali at that time still, tried to make its own analysis and express its gratitude to the Hindu Mela. For the first time, it was challenged by the British government. And with it began the new journey of Bengal. It led to a new concept of masculine Hinduism. And masculine Hinduism had its emphasis, was endorsed by the origin or rise of a new concept of military nationalism under the leadership of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. Rishi Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, in his novels of Anandamath, Devi Chaudhurani, Raj Singh, has explained the need to fight for the Hindu cause that influenced the revolution movement for freedom movement to a large extent. But he was not alone. There was also the presence of Shashodatta Churamani, Jogesh Chandra Vidyani, Desish Chandra Vidyarna. All these people had played a vast role in shaping the political philosophy of Bengal at the time. To a large extent, it can be stated that from 1867 to 1905, there had been an uninhibited Hindu discourse in Bengal that was never challenged by anybody. And this maturity of the political philosophy in Bengal that was governed by the concept of the Hindu identity or Hindutva, as found in the book of Sri Nagendranath Bose for the first time that was published in 1894, it came to realize that Hindutva and Bengali Hindus were getting synonymous by the time. So from the very beginning, though the revolutionary societies like Onushan Shamiti and Juganton Attonoti, they had read the philosophies of Mazzini, Garibaldi, Cafu, Bismarck, but there was also a sufficient, or better to say, a profound veneration to the valor of the Hindu ancient kings, like the Bharadbhuyas of Protabaditya, Sitaram, Ganesh, Prabhu Shankari, and to Maharana Pratap and of course Shivaji Maharaj. In 1906, Balgangadhar Tilak with V.S. Munje, Balakrishna Shivram Munje, and Khopadre came to Bengal and organized and celebrated the Ganesh Utsav. The Ganesh Utsav earned so much respect and popularity in Bengal that in some areas the Ganesh Utsav started by some of the Bengalis. So it was this position and political philosophy that led to the maturity of the movement. But this, though at the same time, in the first phase of the national struggle, there was the presence of two groups, the pro-changers and the no-changers, the pacifists and the extremists. The 1998 Surat Congress remained witness to a bitter confrontation between the two groups, and with the anti-Bongo Bongo Bengal partition movement 1905, the concept of revolutionary movement enthused and espoused by many persons like Brahmabandhu Mukherjee through his seminal daily called Sandhya, got a new height. Now the question remains, it's quite controversial and conventional. At the same time, the revolution methods of the earlier kingdoms were used and also discredited. In 1906, Ulashko Datto in the Presidency College Laboratory in Calcutta, for the first time, changed the formula of making bombs. Now, when we are coming to Khudiram for the first time, it can be found that by that time, Bengal was quite politically conscious. And in a nutshell, it can also be said, it must be said also, that communal conflagrations had started to grow across Bengal by that time. And it started in 1903 when Lord Curzon visited Manan Singh on the invitation of Saleh Mullah, the person who would establish Muslim League in 1906 in Dhaka. From the time, the Manan Singh question and the consequential anti-Bengal partition movement created a furor among the Bengal enlightened and educational class. Now you may be amiss to know that the name of Onushan Shamiti didn't popularize for the Muzaffarpur bomb case. In 1907, a devastating communal confrontation took place at Jamalpur in Maman Singh. And it was then the Dhaka Onushan Shamiti of Puran Bihari Das jumped to the occasion and strengthened the cause of the Hindus, and they're not alone. They were joined by several revolutions from Calcutta with firearms and sharp weapons, like Vipin Bihar Ganguly, Indunath Nandi, and they were sent under the instruction of Jyotirendra Mukherjee. So this is the beginning of the political philosophy of Bengal in the case of Khudiran. Now we will approach gradually with Dr. Sen. Now, sir, I would like to know, I'd like to hand over the entire issue to you to make us realize the political philosophy and also the violent atmosphere in Bengal at that time.
Thank you, Randita, and thank you, Sangam and Kanchan. Um, I'm going to speak at somewhat greater length since I find myself to be the sole speaker today, and I will be a little bit pedantic because I will refer to my notes more extensively than I had intended. Let me begin by saying I am going to provide a rather novel interpretation of the revolutionary activities of Bengal from the early 20th century till pretty much, in fact, up to independence. So most books say it peaked by the late 1930s. Let me divide my talk into four sections. The first is something which you have already referred to, but I will perhaps pause further on that, which is the prolonged historic backdrop to the upsurge of revolutionary activity in the Bengal presidency. That is a backdrop which goes back a very, very long time in our history of Bharat, Hindu Bharat. I also want to elaborate, secondly, on the profound intellectual and spiritual transformation of the Bengal Renaissance that can be credited with catalyzing the revolution in Bengal. So we have these two issues. One, the prolonged historical background to the revolutionary upsurge of Hindu Bengal, and secondly, its immediate intellectual and spiritual antecedents. The third thing I will do is to talk about the revolutionary movement itself and provide some kind of detailed narrative, none of which is unknown or novel, and it's available in some very good textbooks which have been written over the past 25, 30 years. I will only mention that another book is being written by a Bengali scholar, which I hope will be available by the end of next year, specifically focusing on the activities of Bengali Hindu revolutionaries. That is the third point. The fourth point is a conclusion, not so much to the revolution of Bengal, but the concluding tragic final chapter. And in this chapter, I will look at two particular points briefly. One is the long retreat of the Bengali Bhadralok repository of the Bengali Hindu civilization, which has really been going on for, in fact, since the 30s, but really accelerated after the 60s. And I think people will know the scale of the effective ethnic cleansing of the Bengali Bhadralok class from urban Bengal. And finally, a very brief pause to understand where the impact of the initial revolutionary upsurge of Hindu Bengal has continued elsewhere in India. I keep repeating Hindu Bengal because it really was more Hindu than Bengali, and I will elaborate further. So let me start with the first point, the prolonged revolutionary resistance, which of course in the contemporary period was also occurring in Punjab, Maharashtra, and but the struggle for liberation has a very, very long history. And I would like to elaborate why I keep saying Bengali Hindu. When my friend and the author Sai Deepak was asked, "Where did you come from?" He said, "I'm an Indian from Tamil Nadu." He didn't say, "I'm a Tamil from India." So, in the same spirit, I'm locating the Bengali upsurge in Hindu India, though it was a culturally Bengali phenomenon. So, that is why I persist with the insistence on the word Hindu. It is my considered contention, and this is the key thing that I wish to assert and which has not been made in the literature at all or in discussions elsewhere, that a straight line can be drawn from the early 20th century, from the revolution in Bengal that was stirred by the Bengal Renaissance of the 19th and 20th centuries, by its thinkers and artists, which catalyzed the formal independence of India in 1947. So, really, the Bengal Revolution was the catalytic force in India's independence, and I will argue that. Of course, as an aside, I will mention the British contrived to inflict the maximum damage on India before leaving. And I don't refer just to the partition. They contrived to accentuate every social, political fissure and divide in India in the hope of perpetuating their rule. In the way they meddled with electorates, the way they sponsored the DMK, and many other such phenomena. So they inflicted the maximum damage after leaving. And tragically, they handed over power to the people who can be called collaborators and loyalists. Not only were the people to whom power was handed over, by and large, but not everyone at all, were the people who collaborated with the British throughout the 20th century. And of course, we all know that the bureaucrats all remained in place. All the ICS officers remained in place, and the Intelligence Bureau remained very closely allied to the British intelligence service MI5, MI6. So they did massive damage to Al-Tifaq going, partly in the forlorn hope of prolonging their rule, and secondly, there was malice particularly against Bengal, because they understood where their problem had arisen. And of course, the politicians like Nehru and Gandhi were their people. And the evidence of that is now all over the internet in the work of many people, not least people like Professor Kapil Kumar of Delhi, and of course the bureaucrats, and we know IB. But really, the British colonial power did not go because of agitation by Congress, nor because of the sacrifice of countless men and women who endured great suffering was the key reason. The British really thought all of these movements could be kept in check, and the 1942 Quit India movement was a dismal failure. And all of this can be found in intelligence reports available in London. They used to be available in New Delhi, but just before the British left in 1947, the skies of Delhi became black. They were burning the archives. They spent 6 weeks burning the archives, which contained all the records of every collaborator who had worked for the British side, including the leaders of Congress. And I have a specific reference if anybody wants. They said to Nehru, "Don't worry, we've destroyed everything about you." Maybe in jest, but that's what they said to him. And he replied laughingly, "Oh, yes." So he knew what was being done. They took back copies to London, but Much of what was there in India took 6 weeks to burn. But Lord Wavell, who handed over to Mountbatten, was confident, even in the 1930s. Sorry, after he came in 46, when he took over, actually, sorry, in September 43, he came in September 43, that their rule would continue for an indefinite period. Now, why did I say our independence struggle was a long one? There are many instances of wars, and forgive me for this context, which is important to illustrate what I'm trying to argue. There have been many, many wars which have lasted hundreds of years. The 100-Year War between the French and the British, the 500-year war between Russia and the Mongols and Turco-Mongols, whom were finally expelled by Catherine the Great from lands which the Turco-Mongols occupied in the 18th century. So here we have two examples. The Hindu struggle goes back 1,000 years. And this is the context in which we must see what happened in Bengal to understand the true significance and meaning of those 45 years or so of 20th century Bengal revolutionary violence armed struggle. It was not individual violence, what the British called terrorism. This is a more complex and fascinating story. To rehearse this context, let me start. Indians and Hindus have been fighting the Muslims since the 8th century in the Great Northern Coalition led by Nagbat I. Then the King of Kashmir, Lakshmaditya Muktapida, who defeated them. It culminated in the decisive victory over Muslim forces of Suheldev in 1034 AD, after which they did not dare come back for almost 200 years, 180 years or so. Hindus suffered a major setback, the Hindu resistance, when the Delhi Sultanate was established. But it was fought and defeated by the Empire of Vijayanagara and kept at bay south of the Vindhyas for 250 years. So the Hindus had continued to fight. Despite the bitterest struggles, in one particular battle, the Delhi Sultanate killed 500,000 Hindus in one battle. 500,000. Such was the ferocity of the Hindu resistance. Of course, Vijayanagar was to fail and fall because of serious strategic military errors of its rulers in the mid-16th century, failing to re-equip, failing to understand the advances in cannon of Delhi Sultanate. And they were, I believe, betrayed by two Muslim generals, the Gilani brothers. This is alleged. And the Muslims then won. It took 2 months for them to destroy the capital, Hampi. Hampi was known as the world's richest and most magnificent city, the world's most magnificent and wealthiest city in the 16th century, only exceeded in size by Beijing. So, the argument is Hindu military struggles were a permanent feature of India. It is not like they had caps. Yes, it paused, but it never stopped. Even Emperor Akbar was defeated by Hemu, and King Vikramaditya started an empire, though briefly. Only for 100 years, 100 years, did the Muslims have relatively uninterrupted rule over India, but not all of it. A vast expanse of the Indian Empire, but not all of it. And that is from the end of Akbar's reign till the beginning of Aurangzeb in 1658. 100 years. That is the only time they had relatively uninterrupted rule. But the resistance to Aurangzeb began by the 1660s. So they had reached apogee. So Hindus were fighting all the time. This is what I want to stress. Hindus never stopped fighting. And by 1706, the Hindus had defeated the Mughal Empire. The Jats and the Marathas, under the leadership of the great king Chhatrapati Shivaji defeated them. And the emperor, after the early 18th century, was a mere retainer of the Maratha Empire, which had destroyed the Mughals. So in that entire period, Hindus had kept fighting. This is what I want to argue a little bit later. The British began conquest, as we know, in Bengal in 1757, but they did not complete their conquest until 1846, when they defeated the successors of the great King Maharaja Ranjit Singh. They did so after actually military defeat by a mixture of deceit and chicanery, buying off the generals of the descendants, sons of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. They bought them off. Then there was a brief pause, only 10 years. And we have the Great Indian Rebellion 1857. So the Hindus rose up against the British within 10 years. The British achieved not complete control by them, but very substantial control over the entire Indian subcontinent. But they were almost defeated. They almost went under. And it was really the Sikhs who helped them survive the Sikh siege of Delhi. But this brief hiatus succeeded pretty much straight away in the 1860s. And there were many rebellions which the British denounced as a protest of criminal thuggy tribes. This is what the British called them. We should not accept what the British called them. These were rebellions localized, but they were rebellions against foreign rule. So the cultural protest and the battle for the recovery of India from foreign invaders was unceasing. It was the prospect of 1857 once again that prompted much later, if you look at the records, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. This is why they wanted to give an example by killing a lot of innocent people, because this is what their record showed. They thought this was going to be a repeat. So bear in mind, even in 1919, they thought they were going to be in India forever. This is where I come to our story, the story of Eastern India, the Bengal Presidency. The extraordinary revolutionary upsurge of early 20th century Bengal was the most important and potent resumption of violent struggle for independence, which traces its roots back to Suheldev, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Maharaja Shivaji, and so many others. So we have an unbroken thread to which the Bengali revolutionaries, the Bengali Hindu revolutionaries, were the legatees. There were violent struggles elsewhere, of course, in the Punjab, Maharashtra, but the sheer scale of the military struggle in Bengal was unparalleled. It was this Bengal violence that led finally to the British deciding to leave India. They did not grant independence, they only gave dominion status, but they decided they could not carry on in India. And I will argue why. But just for the moment, I will say, if you look at the British records, the British made no distinction between Khudiram Bose and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. The British records, police records, and there are hundreds of documents in Calcutta. So they called him the biggest Bengali terrorist. They regarded him as no different. It is we who have forgotten what tradition Subhash Bose came from. He came from the same armed struggle tradition, except his great achievement was to turn this into a formal military campaign. The armed struggle of Bengal was turned by Subhash Bose into an army which came through India. And of course, the real reason, of course, was not that they won in Burma because they were defeated, but it was Subhash Bose who catalyzed the key reason the British left: the rebellion, naval mutinies, and the fear of widespread revolt in the British Indian armed forces. Bear in mind, Indians were the largest group of people, one of the largest groups of people who fought in the First World War. Excuse me. And the British had told them, as a reward for your loyalty, we will give India home rule, which they did not. This is why ultimately the Indian armed forces were threatening to revolt, and we saw the naval mutinies. This was the great achievement of Subhash Bose. He is the one who began this in Singapore with the prisoners of war of the British Indian Army. But Subhash Bose, as Attlee told the Bengal governor in the 50s, who drove them away, not Nehru. When asked about Gandhi, he laughed. So that is why the Bengal revolutionaries are responsible for the British eventually leaving, because it is they who were the architects of the movement which was ultimately led by Subhash Bose. I do not underrate what happened everywhere. Many people died, many people fought in Maharashtra, Punjab. But the real reason Britain left was because of the phenomenon of Subhash Bose, not because of local rebellions, which they thought they could control. Where did the Bengal Revolution start? This is my second part. It started with the Bengal cultural renaissance. It can be traced back to the mists of time and the revival of Dharma. And the most important movement for 1,000 years was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the very midst of Muslim rule. His great bhakti movement in the early 16th century was the most decisive reassertion of Hindu Dharma. That is why it was Hindu and only Bengal, incidentally, the restatement. And then I go forward. Many centuries of great Hindu struggles were happening across India. There are wonderful books which tell you in detail of the many movements of protests, Benares, so many other places, Kashmir. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was one of the most important phenomena in the region, which was going to become the center of British rule. And then we move rapidly to the 18th and 19th centuries, the 19th mostly. And the modern phenomenon is attributable to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He single-handedly sought to resuscitate the study and revival of dharmic values through his own research into the Vedas. Many accuse him of his proximity to Christianity. This is completely false. I rather believe his near contemporaries than pen pushers in America and British universities. His role in their life was acknowledged by none other than Rabindranath Tagore and Swami Vivekananda. And I think they are the final arbiters. One British commentator I was reading about recently said his engagement with Christianity, Ram Mohan's engagement with Christianity, was a vehicle for defending Hinduism. This is what one English commentator has said. So Ram Mohan's role was monumental. He was the father of the intellectual renaissance and the nationalist perspective, because he was trying to prepare India and Hindus for freedom. The next stage very quickly begins, specifically with the publishing of Neel Darpan in the picture Dinabandhu Mitra's Neel Brandt 1861 about the brutality of white English indigo planters toward the indentured peasants. This was a very critical part of Bengali Hindu consciousness. And then we have the explosion of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and Anandabad 1882. So just think, 1857, and we had the first intellectual resistance, 1861. By 1882 is open intellectual warfare and an attempt to articulate and voice Hindu rebellion in the work of the magnificent Bankim Chandra. And it was his incantation Bande Mataram, which was to become the war cry of the revolutionaries and has remained so central to the India I will speak about at the very end. But the Bengali Hindu cultural and spiritual renaissance was actually underpinned by a larger, wider phenomenon, which we underrate and don't understand. It flowed from the endlessly prolific pen of Rabindranath Tagore. And I give you a very specific example how, in a nuanced and subtle way, this was very important for the Bengali revolutionaries. In Gitanjali, he speaks eloquently about spiritual emancipation. Spiritual emancipation presupposes many preconditions. Slaves cannot be spiritually emancipated. Political emancipation is a precondition of spiritual emancipation. Rabindranath Tagore talked about spiritual emancipation, making implicit the wider issue. There were others of great significance, not just Tagore, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, who had a transformative impact on the world view of the Hindu Bhadralok. Hindu, I keep saying, because they belong to Bharat, and they just happen to be located in Bengal by an accident of fate. And in 1902, we have the formation of the Anushrul Samiti, which Ranjita, you have addressed, so I will skip through that. And basically, Dhaka and Calcutta were the two principal areas. Calcutta was Yugantur. The 1,000-year-long history of Hindu revolt was recommencing with this spiritual and intellectual awakening from Ram Mohan to Bankim, Tagore, Vivekananda. You have then Anushilan, Aurobindo Ghosh, Maharishi Aurobindo. It had widespread support amongst women. Women were a very important part of Anushilan Samiti. They joined his ranks and committed some of the most high-profile assassinations and attempts to assassinate. So let's not forget that women were a very important part of this, and we should feel immensely proud of our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers who fought, gave their lives. So Anushilan Samiti was
So
giving shape.
may I add some points? May I please? So at this juncture, we must also keep in mind that the Rotherham's conspiracy case number one, and the
Which one?
Gurdjieff, the Rotherham's conspiracy,
Yes, yes,
Rotherham's
yes,
certainly, and number two, the Gurdjieff
yes, yes.
dacoity by Jyotirndra Mukherjee, that was happened to be the first motorized action in the entire continent of Asia. Not only rocked the Indian theatre, but also had similar projections even in the first class newspapers of the West, even like Manchester Guardian and America. I think this must also be mentioned at the same time. This happens to be one of the greatest uh, deeds of valiance at the time by the Bengal revolutionaries. Just a point for me, sir.
I
Thank
agree.
you.
I have actually 14 pages of text, and I was editing out and only picking on the most well-known ones. Yes, I have left out so many episodes. You see. So, anyway, I absolutely right. I'm glad you reminded, because that was the earliest one. You see, and then um, we have, of course, Aurobindo Ghosh and his brother establishing Vande Mataram, Yugantar, spreading militant nationalism. All of that happened. See, this is just
I'm sorry to disturb you once more, sir. Just a minute. I'm just sorry to say. But only 2 or 3 days back, I was going through the Rowlett report of the Rowlett Commission, and the way the British authorities had explained and analyzed the profound role played by Dhaka Mission Samiti, and they were amazed to find how can a revolution organization like Dhaka Mission Samiti, so in such a distant land, so lack of technology, can function this way.
I'm going to talk about that now. I'm going to talk about
Okay,
that.
thank you, thank you.
Prepared to live with them. They were not our equals, and the racism was blatant. The British racism was blatant. We have forgotten how nasty and racist the British were. They still remain, by the way. I've lived here 53 years. Let me confirm. The racism is there in Oxbridge, London School of Economics. It is more underground and more subtle, but it's there. The Hindus were fed up with British rule because of the terrible famines. You know, between 1860 and 1897, 37 years, 20 million famine deaths were recorded in India. 20 million. That's just an estimate. And Ramesh Chandra Dutt wrote this in his open letter to Lord Curzon. But the immediate catalyst to the Bengali revolt actually was the Swadeshi movement, which happened after the partition of Bengal in 1905. And this boycott of products really did not succeed. And that is when a decision was made to go full-scale violent to overthrow the British. And there were two events which were of tangential importance. One was the defeat of Japan, Russia's defeat by Japan in 1905, the naval plan. That actually had a tremendous psychological effect. And the Bengali Hindus thought the Europeans are not invincible. And of course, the formation of the Muslim League in 1906. These were two critical signals. So an official meeting was held in 1906 in favor of violence of all the revolutionary leaders. And then there was the attempted murder of District Magistrate Kingsford, who had taken to whipping demonstrators. There had been one earlier attempt to kill him, which had failed, and Prafulla Chaki and Khudiram Bose sought to kill him. That was botched, and the daughter and wife of an English.
So the boy was named Sushil Sen, who was whipped at the instructions of Lord Curzon. Sushil Sen, he was whipped.
Yeah. There were demonstrators who were being whipped, and this was the reason why they wanted to kill him. And the bombing went wrong and hit the wrong carriage, and Khudiram Bose was caught. Prafulla Chaki committed suicide, and he was hanged. And his display of courage and bravado actually became one of the most important events in the history of early 20th century Bengal. And a Khudiram Bose Day was instituted to commemorate and remember him. And this actually is something the revolutionaries constantly remembered and referred to. In 1909, let me go quickly because I'm seeing I'm going over a little bit, were investigating religious mendicants or sadhus and sannyasis, regarded by the colonial authorities as mysterious figures who spread sedition and unrest around the country and had done so in 1857. So the religious figures were considered very important by the colonial authority. So the Hindu religious body was fully engaged. And they said that these people traveled around a great deal in 1857, and Eastern Bengal and Assam police believed they were doing this again half a century later. Revolutionaries enjoyed popular support across Bengal. One senior official said it was testing the loyalty of Hindu district magistrates because they came from the same class and families as the nationalists, and they said we need more Europeans to replace them. Revolutionaries had also, according to intelligence reports, infiltrated every Congress local committee and were regarded as a very serious threat. So the revolution was not about just throwing bombs. It was a political, organizational struggle with strong characteristics of arms being born. By 1914, they were importing arms from Europe. The big arm shipments were often caught, but they imported a lot of small arms. They had sympathizers amongst the sailors called Laskars, which made it possible. They were also traveling abroad to forge alliances with other anti-colonial movements, understand their ideologies, etc. The Hindu Bengali revolutionary movement actually influenced anti-colonial movements outside India, and it also impacted the narrow ethos of non-violence by the activities. So they not only influenced people abroad, the attempt to impose non-violence was also changed. The British police said they were an unparalleled danger. In 1912, the Bengal Revolution managed to injure the Viceroy, Lord Hardinge, and they committed 50 dacoities to raise funds for assassinations. And it is estimated there were 6,000 Bengali Hindus involved by 1910. 6,000. It peaked in the 1930s, and by 1932, 3,000 had been arrested. In 1935, 540 nationalists had been convicted, 2,781 were under preventive detention. So the numbers are very large. They wanted to disrupt the administration, assassinate British and colonial officials, agents, and informers, and commit robberies, etc. Farms. In 1930, they attacked Writers' Building, the seat of government, and assassinated the Inspector General of Police. In the same year, they carried out the most audacious uprising, imitating the Irish uprising of 1916. This is the Chittagong Armory Raid, which was basically supposed to be a bit like the Irish uprising. The British by then said it was guerrilla warfare. It was not individual armed action, guerrilla warfare. This is the guerrilla warfare became a fully fledged armed struggle under Subhash Bose. 500 revolutionary crimes were committed and a further 200 acts of violence. British police had 650 officers by then in Bengal. 400 gathering in Bengal alone. And the IB staff, let me summarize quickly, rose from 300 to 700 IB staff in Calcutta, 300 to 700. So great and large was the Bengal revolution activity. The British actually tried to use 19th century ideas from early episodes and call them Bhadlok dacoits in order to see how they could tackle them. They had no idea. But others said actually they were not just dacoits because they came from a different class. Basically, it was a Hindu Bhadlok class. They said these were savage and horrible devotees of the goddess Kali. They had the lowest and most sadistic passions, the filthiest literature, and they were depraved mentally and morally. You can see this is an instance of despair for them to be saying these things. That they had adopted the most terrible acts of Hinduism. So let us not forget these revolutionaries were first and foremost Hindu. There was no secularism, and I will explain that a little bit later. They worshipped Kali most of all. And of course, as you have said, they studied the works of Mazzini, Garibaldi, De Valera of Ireland, Lenin, etc. So the British formulated very novel ways of trying to catch them. Chris Bailey says their reaction was information panic. And Mark Kondos, a scholar, says it had become the insecurity state. Such was the fear of Bengal revolutionary violence. Francis Booth Tucker, a name we should remember because we are very, very forgetful, was the founder of the Salvation Army. He was responsible for incarcerating and holding detainees. The Salvation Army was fully engaged with the British authorities in fighting Bengal terrorism. And he wrote in a letter to the Secretary of State, John Morley, a kind of guerrilla warfare in which 3 to 4 million hereditary criminals were ranged against the authority of the colonial state. 3 to 4 million. This is one of the authorities. As a result of the activities of the Bengali Revolution abroad, let me add as a final conclusion to this section, the British had to establish intelligence services abroad in many other countries of Europe, Canada, and the United States. So wide and so significant was this movement. And finally, C.F. Andrews, whose name many will remember as a friend of Gandhi, he wrote to Lord Hardinge that your people are making lives miserable for every Bengali middle class. You're even ripping open the letters of Rabindranath Tagore, harassing all his students. And the faculty is suffering worse. This is C.F. Andrews writing to Lord Hardinge. But the degree of harassment, imagine the scale, so that to even open the letters of Rabindranath Tagore. At Bolpur, the school is systematically spied on. Our teachers' lives are harassed, etc., etc. In Calcutta, things are so bad that students live in panic. Lord Carmichael, Governor of Bengal, that all educated Bengal Indians whom I met, apparently the police believe the police are spying on them continually. So that gives you a sense of how important the Bengali revolutionary activity was. So this is the brief and truncated narrative of the scale of the threat Bengali Hindu revolutionaries posed to the British state, which I have said produced Subhash Bose and led ultimately to Indian independence. This was the last violent struggle of Hindus in India going back to Suheldev and before with Chhatrapati Shivaji, the rebellion. So it is one long unbroken thread of violence of Hindus to overthrow foreign rule. So do not underestimate the significance of Bengal revolutionaries because they gave us independence ultimately. Four events, I will conclude in 20 minutes, 15 minutes. Four significant events impacted Bengali revolution and nationalism. The movement of the capital 1911 was a big blow to the Bhadralo because it took away all the white collar jobs. Bengal was no longer going to remain the mainstream of Indian political life. That was ebbing away. So the partition of the Bengal presidency was reversed, but the capital moved. So that was the first big blow to the Bengali Hindu middle class. Because they went because they were afraid of what was going on in Bengal. They wanted to reduce the number of targets in Bengal. That's why they went to Delhi. The Bengali Hindu revolutionaries drove them out of Bengal by attacking them. They stayed for a little while longer, but by 1911, they thought we have to go. The second was the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi in 1915. And by 1920, he had totally corrupted the independence struggle. And he did not express any sympathy, right, from South Africa for Khudiram Bose's execution. By then, the British knew him well. He had gone to London many times. He had many interactions with senior officials. They knew Gandhi extremely well. He was a friend who had helped organize Indians to fight in the Boer War by saying you should be ambulance staff, etc., etc. So he was a recruiter for the British Army. So they knew everything about him. So his coming was very, very important. The next big thing which happens in India is Subhash Bose. And his behavior was different from those of revolutionaries because he was confronted by a very different situation of the Congress party becoming ascendant. So by the time Subhash Bose came, the circumstances had changed, so he joined the Congress party. And then he was, of course, removed. We know because the British asked Gandhi to remove him from Congress presidency. That is now openly known that he did this on behalf of the British. But Subhash Bose's coming was the next big event. So we have first the movement of the capital, then we have Gandhi undermining revolutionary struggles in India, and then we have Subhash Bose, who's within the movement, but posing a great threat because he was known as the biggest terrorist of them all by the British authorities. So the Bengal Revolution was then embodied in Subhash Bose. The third event of great misfortune to Bengal was M.N. Roy in 1925. And I know from my family history, the grandchildren of Dinesh Chandra Sen were all influenced by Indian communism. And my grandfather actually was the only one who was not. Arun Sen, he joined the forward bloc in 1938 and went to jail. So he was one of the few. The most important person not to join communism. In fact, Bengal was totally corrupted. Many became collaborators. The great revolutionary movement was hurt by Indian Bengali communism was Sachindranath Sanyal. Sachindranath Sanyal, once Subhash Bose had left Bengal, became the most important revolutionary leader of the whole of India. People don't remember. There is no statue for this great man in Gorakhpur where he died. And what is most impressive about this man was that he never retreated. In that entire period of his life fighting, he never had second thoughts after so much struggle, so much suffering in jail. And the second thing, he remained a devout Hindu. He was one of the few important revolutionary figures who did not get tempted by communism. So this is a great man. And I have been saying to my friends, if I had the money, I would erect his statue somewhere in India. And Gorakhpur is the best place for this great, great man who symbolizes the great revolutionary struggle which began in Bengal, Subhash Bose. Finally, of the four events, the move of the capital, Gandhi, Subhash Bose, Communist Party, is the creation of the Krishak Praja Party in 1929. This was basically a Muslim peasant party. They always sided with the Muslim League, and Bengali communists were swallowed up by them. Basically, the Bengali communists were effectively carrying the program of the Krishak Praja Party because that was the largest mass of peasants organized by them, and they were Muslims. This is why Bengal communism was basically Islamic from the very beginning. From the very beginning, Bengal communist was a shadow of Islam right up to 2012, when they were existed. Many Bengali communists took up Muslim names to work with the Muslim peasants. So in the end, the British left because of what I have said, Subhash Bose, the mutinies, and Governor Chakrabarti, as I have already hinted, told Attlee, we had to go because we couldn't hold India down. And Field Marshal Auchinleck had said, you need 100,000 British troops from Britain to hold it down. After the Second World War, Britain could not do that. They had no money, and the Americans would have been hostile to this happening. And they were totally bankrupt, and the Americans were demanding repayment of Lend-Lease loans given to England. So the British were in no state to send 100,000 soldiers. They would have liked to have done so, and Churchill too understood. This is where Subhash Bose was hated so much from Bengali Hindus. The Bengali Hindu movement, if I may make an analogy in conclusion, failed to directly expel the British by 1935. But their impact was a bit like the Vietnamese Tet offensive against the Americans in 1968. Vietnam launched an unexpected massive war against the American occupiers in 1968 and inflicted huge casualties. In the end, the Vietnamese did not win that campaign. They lost that battle, but they won the war because that defeat led to the American decision to withdraw in 72 because the American people no longer wished to be there. That was the reason Nixon decided to go. And that is how the Bengali Hindu revolutionaries, like the Vietnamese in 68, created the conditions for the British departure. Finally, partition destroyed a huge chunk of Bengali Hindus. 1 million were murdered by 1950 in East Pakistan. 80% of Dhaka was owned by Hindu Bengali Badalok. 80%. In most cities, Bengali Hindus owned 80% of the city. They were en masse murdered, and Liaquat Khan and Nehru signed a pact to hide this. And that is why K.C. Niyogi and Shyamaprasad Mukherjee resigned from the cabinet. In fact, Patel and Shyamaprasad Mukherjee had proposed armed intervention to save the Bengali Hindus. And Nehru had said, if you insist, I will go and work in a Muslim refugee camp. This is our great Jawaharlal Nehru. That was a very big blow to the Bengali Hindus, a very big blow from which they didn't quite recover. Most of them lost their landed wealth. So that was also an economic impact. So the economic policy of West Bengal became a rump, a small rump. It also led to the liquidation of industry and commerce in Bengal. Communists extinguished that by the mid-70s. They had killed it completely. And in a way, the Naxalite revolt was a symptom. It was a meaningless, violent symptom because violence had become deeply embedded in the Bengali Hindu Bhadalok. I had a very strong association with the Naxalites. They were mainly Bengali Hindu Bhadalok who were involved. They were the same people who had been revolutionaries in the first quarter of the 20th century. And it was a cry of despair because it was totally without meaning. 5,000 of them were killed by the police, 5,000. This Islamized left was taken away by the TMC because her dispensation provided a fully Islamized alternative. CPM was not fully Islamized. TMC took that over. So from Bakhtiar Khilji to Mamata, we have Islam at the beginning and Islam now. And in conclusion, something peculiar, tragic, and ironic happens. Narendra Modi comes to power. He comes to power. And he does something which people have not fully understood. He places Subhash Bose's statue in India Gate. He fully recognizes the role of the Bengali revolutionaries by putting Subhash Bose's statue there. And he repudiates the legacy of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi without saying so in so many words. So we came full circle. I'm afraid, my fear, it is over for the Bengali Hindu Bandhulok and the great renaissance for which they fought from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Bhairam Ram Mohan, Aurobindo, Vivekananda, right up to the 1940s. That, I think, is gone. On that note, let me say namaste to you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sen, for its groundbreaking initiative. Well, let me add a few points. As Dr. Sen has said, it must also be said that in 1930s, there had been a lull of revolutionary activities. It was again recommenced in 1928 with the emergence of the Bengal volunteers, the revolutionary Bengal volunteers. In Dhaka, Binoy Bose gunned down Mr. Lohman, the IG prison, and then he came to Calcutta to take a part in that famous episode of Writers' Building. At the same time, there is also the murders of three magistrates in sequence, Petty, Burge, and Douglas in Midnapore, and that rocked the entire Bengal scenario. But it must be taken at the same time that there was also a, not so powerful, but there was also a quite good amount of Gandhian movement in Bengal. But by 1938, the Congress was under the grip of Surendra Mohan Ghosh or Mothu Babu. He had been a leader of the Juganto revolutionary groups. And from that time, it came to realization that revolutionaries has started to enter Congress. Now there is a great rumor in Bengal that Dr. S. Mukherjee, Shama Prasad Mukherjee, and Subhash Chandra Bose had a great enmity between them. And for that reason, in one political fight, he was Dr. Mukherjee was beaten by Subhash Bose's henchmen, and then Hindu Mahasabha again lambasted the electoral defeats of electoral meetings of Ford Bloc. But I do have something more to say. On 6 November 1945, the Bengal Provincial Hindu Mahasabha passed a resolution in support of INA, stating that INA soldiers are patriots, trials should not lead to hanging of soldiers, and they have committed any crime, and certainly the INA person should be released at once. In the following days' press conference, Dr. Mukherjee was witness to say that the cult of non-violence had vitiated the whole atmosphere of India. No nation could preserve itself merely by practicing non-violence. The British had made Indians effeminate by keeping them disarmed for 200 years. There's no doubt of it. The British colonialism expanded in the subcontinent through a gradual process of demilitarization. And there are also evidences in the Lal Bajar Police Archive in Calcutta that some INA cadets are asking Dr. Mukherjee's permission to join the Hindu Mahasabha since they had advanced military training. It must also be stated at the same time that Major General Lieutenant General S.C. Chatterjee, who was the number 3 INA cabinet, the first 3 persons of the INA cabinet, the Commander-in-Chief Subhash Chandra Bose, his advisor, and the great revolutionary Ras Bihari Bose, followed by S.C. Chatterjee, were 3 Bengal revolutionaries who had revolvers in their closet. S.C. Chatterjee had joined the Hindu Mahasabha by 1946. And he was also a key figure at Hindu Mahasabha's West Bengal and the Talukeshwar conference in 1947 in Bengal, where it was determined that West Bengal's growth, the concept of West Bengal, the concept of establishing a Hindu-dominant West Bengal must take place. At the same time, there was a bitter struggle between the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabha, so the Congress, over the position of Calcutta. The Pakistan leadership was determined to take over Calcutta, since Calcutta at the time was the second city to London in the entire British Empire, and it also remained the financial capital of India till 1963. When Salari Subha said very clearly that we have a pistol and we can use it at any time, the same S.C. Chatterjee, in a public meeting, stated angrily, he roared that every Hindu household shall be turned into a fortress. Now, the last figment of the last, when we are talking of the political revolution and the militarization, must be stated. In 1949, after the ban on Hindu Mahasabha was lifted, a special conference of the Hindu Mahasabha took place at Sukiya Street in Calcutta. And in the wake of the Hindu genocide in 1950, the Bengal Provincial Hindu Mahasabha formed a militia to go to East Pakistan and join the Hindus and fight for them. The militia was organized by none other than Ashutosh Lahiri, who had been a revolutionary throughout his life, was involved in the Rwanda conspiracy case in 1914, and he was assisted by another revolutionary called Upendra Banerjee. Upendra Banerjee had been a part of the Umshon Samiti in 1908 case. So lots of revolutions were there in Hindu Mahasabha till that time. But unfortunately, something happened, which the history we are quite skeptical of what happens to the history is not known to us, since there have been hardly any narrators of these events. How the Hindu nationalism in Bengal was supplanted by the Marxism by the mid 1950s is yet to be known. We are trying to make some researches, but unfortunately, the files, the archives can't be accessed due to our own incompetency and capability. So, as a last, I would like to ask Dr. Sen a question. Sir, I would like to ask you one question, sir. When a nation is on the verge of existential crisis, the Bengali Hindus are on the verge of final collapse. Is it possible for them to come out once more and adopt the policies of the predecessors a century back? Is it possible for this generation? Do you think so? An act of desperation, I think. Is it possible for them?
I would like to give an honest answer to this, and not a hopeful one, because it will reassure people.
Okay.
In the end, one does not know under what circumstances there can be reassertion. Let me go by what little data I have. In the 2021 May elections for the Assembly, 38% of those Hindus who voted for BJP. 38%. And TMC only got 18% of those who voted. She only got 10% of the Hindu votes of all those who were eligible to vote. Of those who voted, she got about 18-20%. She got 48% in the election. BJP got 38. If 6% of Hindus had switched sides, she would have been at 42 and the BJP would have been at 44. 6%. Now, I'm very implacable and inflexible about principles. I never concede. But I'm extremely calculating, pragmatic about tactics. So my view is this: the BJP fought a really terrible election. You were involved, I was involved, Kanchan was involved. We all know what the leaders were doing from outside Bengal. We all know what the Bengali Hindus from outside were doing. They not just incompetent, they were stupid. They listened to nothing. They knew everything, and everybody wanted to be chief minister. There were 18 names for chief minister. And a Modi supporter from London had decided who would go to be the education minister. A Modi supporter in London from East Africa, who had never been to Bengal, he had decided who the education minister would be in Bengal. This was the BJP in Bengal. Excuse me. I also think that the view of inducting defectors was rejected because the people of Bengal are stupid, but not that stupid. They had no confidence in defectors. They thought, well, you might as well vote for the party from which they came. But that's all we have. BJP is all we have. We have nothing else. So let's not say we'll start a new movement. This is not going to happen.
So the question is of the question is of an identity.
No, let me finish. If BJP wins, you have political power. You need political power. Talk is very different. Once you have political power, you can do many things on the ground.
Certainly.
So that is the key. If the BJP can win an election, they can transform Bengal. It's the first thing for Bengal, which will only unfold over 1 decade and more, 1 decade minimum. And for India, the same, is change the narrative. You see what the children are reading in schools, what utter anti-Hindu rubbish they are being taught. Central government has failed. BJP government, of course, the Bengal government has a hand in this too. You must re-educate people. People follow what they're told to follow. They are socialized to talk nonsense. I meet a lot of Bengalis, very highly educated, who want Bengal to be an Islamic republic. These are all my contemporaries, very well off, very educated, Bengali Hindu Brahmins. These are not people you can persuade. You have to use state power. So the key is not what you can do on the ground. That is something you should do. That for us is existential. Otherwise, we as individuals die if we don't work on the ground, which you are doing, Ranjit. But state power is the key. We must always find ways of helping state power to be captured. Then we can make stuff. Not everything will be done, but that's a prerequisite.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. This is my second end card as well. This is my second end card to you. I talked to you for the first time at a mammoth gathering of Hindu Sangati in Calcutta when I was just translating Richard Benkin before a huge gathering of almost 90,000 people. It was my first encounter to you.
His dying was such a loss because, he understood Bengal. He really understood Bengal. And he had incredible organizational skills and he was a great orator. What more could you want from a leader? Intellectual skill, organizational skill, great orator, but he did not take care of himself. He exposed himself to COVID. No, this COVID business, he exposed himself. I understand we all get callous, but he was very precious. And
so we did struggle together, and to me personally, it's a great tragedy, his death, and it's also a mystery. His death is still a mystery to me, and to many of his fellow strugglers.
That is true. That is also true.
Yeah.
You see, and the BJP leadership didn't like him, though he was one of theirs. RSS leadership didn't like him. He was one of theirs.
We were also termed as Hindu radicals. The Hindu branch of Hindu radicals who must not be touched by anybody. That was our identity at the time.
Ranjita, we must be politically sensible.
Yeah.
We still need the BJP in Bengal because setting up an alternative political party is very difficult. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money. So we have to influence the BJP within. It is not all bad. A lot of the cadres are there because they believe, they have confidence in the future of Hindus. We are in grave danger.
Certainly. We are on the verge of a final collapse.
India is in grave danger. I am very fearful of 2024. I am not buying this story that we will romp home and have a majority. I am not convinced. I hope so. And you cannot keep playing the Modi card everywhere you go. That's all they have, the Modi card. But I hope that will be enough. But I am not sure BJP will be in power. I am not sure. And that future for India, leave alone Bengal, is terrifying.
Diabolical.
BJP has never got more than 42% of the national vote. They got more in the north, less in the south. But nationally, it's never been In fact, average is 42, 44. In some states, they got more than 50. If you include Gujarat, Rajasthan, UP, but on average, the BJP vote is 38 to 44. So Hindus want corrupt, rotten people in the pay of foreigners. All these parties leaders that we all know meet the ISA in Dubai. Many of them send their senior party leaders to meet them in Dubai. A lot of these individuals are not to be trusted. No names, no party names, no specifics, but many of them are not to be trusted.
So we can realize your indications, what you are trying to say, sir.
No,
So-
you see, it's very, very simple. What is happening in India is very simple. Our adversaries abroad do not like our economic and military modernization. That anybody can understand. Our adversaries don't like that. What they want is a divided, weak coalition government in Delhi. So this modernization will stall. Modi is modernizing India and it is threatening the global status quo. So anybody who's against Modi is against India's modernization. You can say whatever you like about Modi, but if you look at what's happened to India's modernization 2014 to 2023, you don't have to argue. Just look at the data. Just look at the data.
Exactly. There's no doubt to it. There can't be any doubt to it. And then anyone who doubts is certainly not an Indian. It can't be a friend of India. There's no doubt to it. So with
World
all
Bank
this,
says he has done in India. World Bank has said in digitization he has done in India what would have taken 47 years. This man is a divine gift. He is a divine gift, not by his personality, by his action. Forget the debate, forget everything. Only look at his actions. That's all that matters.
So with all this, sir, we come to an end. I hope the people who have watched today have liked the conversations and our points and our thought procedures, and hope there will be more such conversations on the same subject in the coming days in the same channel. Please continue to with this. Please continue to pursue this channel, like it, share it, and please comment. We would like to have your comments, sir. Thank you. Anything more, sir? To Mr.
Thank you.
Akshay Jadhav, myself, please, sir, for the Sangam Talks.
Thank you so much, Anumitra ji. Thank you for moderating this session today. Thank you so much, Professor Gautam Sen. It has been a really illuminating session, and we have learned a lot. I'm sure all of the Sangam Talks viewers must have learned a lot as well. Also, I would like to apologize to few of the Sangam Talks viewers because they must be expecting Sanjeev ji here as well. But I'm sure that Professor Gautam Sen's lecture has left no topic to be touched, and he has covered entire spectrum of this lecture today. Thank you so much, sir, for taking up this lecture completely, and thank you so much for all the viewers for joining today. Thank you so much, Anumitra ji. It has been a pleasure learning from you, Professor Sen. With that, we'll close this session today. Thank you so much, and it has been.
Thank you.